The judge was paid. The whisper was so soft that it should have disappeared beneath the quiet hum of the courtroom. Yet somehow it struck William Harrington harder than any shouted accusation ever could. His hand froze just inches above the polished oak railing as he slowly turned toward the tiny voice beside him. Standing there was a little black girl no older than 9, her neatly braided hair tied with faded blue ribbons and a worn backpack hanging from one shoulder. She looked far too small to interrupt the machinery of justice, yet there was nothing uncertain in her deep brown eyes. She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging. She simply looked at him with the calm determination of someone carrying a truth too heavy for a child. Across the courtroom, sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long golden beams over rows of attorneys, reporters, and spectators whose attention remained fixed on the judge preparing to deliver the verdict. The American flag stood motionless behind the bench. Every polished surface reflected an image of order, dignity, and confidence. Everything appeared exactly as justice was supposed to look. William Harrington had spent decades building one of the largest investment firms in the country, and although newspapers often described him as a billionaire philanthropist, few people inside the courtroom knew the real reason he had attended that morning. His charitable foundation had invested millions of dollars supporting legal aid programs for families who could not afford proper representation. He believed deeply that fairness should never depend on wealth. Today he had expected nothing more than observing another ordinary proceeding before returning to Manhattan for an afternoon board meeting. Instead, a child's whisper had stopped time. He lowered himself slightly until he was level with her eyes. "What did you say?" he asked quietly. The girl glanced toward the judge's bench before answering. "He took money," she whispered again. "If he reads that paper, my mom loses even though she didn't do anything wrong." William studied her face carefully. Children often sensed when adults dismissed them, yet this little girl seemed completely unconcerned about whether anyone believed her. She spoke with the steady confidence of someone repeating something she knew instead of something she feared. Before William could ask another question, the bailiff called for silence. Every conversation disappeared. The judge adjusted his glasses, gathered several pages together, and reached for the wooden gavel resting beside his right hand. Naomi Brooks instinctively grabbed the strap of her backpack tighter. Her knuckles turned pale against the worn fabric, but her voice never trembled. "Please," she whispered. "You only have a minute." William's heartbeat slowed instead of racing, the way it always did whenever his instincts told him something important was hiding beneath the surface. Throughout his career, billion-dollar negotiations had often depended on recognizing tiny details others overlooked: a delayed answer, an unexpected glance, a nervous hand. Now he noticed the judge briefly avoiding eye contact with the defense attorney before clearing his throat. It lasted less than a second. Most people would never have noticed. William did. Naomi noticed too. She looked toward the same exchange before quietly saying, "See?" The courtroom remained perfectly still. A ceiling fan turned lazily overhead, its soft rhythm mixing with the distant sounds of traffic several stories below. Outside, another ordinary morning unfolded across downtown Chicago. Inside, every second carried increasing weight. William glanced toward the defendant's table. Grace Brooks sat quietly beside her public defender, her hands folded together, her expression calm despite the uncertainty surrounding her future. She looked exhausted but dignified, wearing a simple navy blouse and a silver cross around her neck. When her eyes briefly met Naomi's, she offered the smallest reassuring smile a mother could give a frightened child. Naomi answered with a faint smile of her own before looking back toward William. "My mom told me that telling the truth always matters," she said softly, "even if nobody wants to hear it." William felt something shift inside him. The sentence was simple, almost ordinary, yet spoken with a sincerity impossible to manufacture. He had heard polished speeches from presidents, celebrated attorneys, and Fortune 500 executives, but none carried the quiet weight of those few words. The judge lifted the first page of the written decision. Several reporters prepared their notebooks. Camera lenses quietly adjusted focus. Somewhere near the back row, someone coughed before silence settled once again across the room. William looked once more at Naomi. "How do you know?" he asked. Instead of answering immediately, she slowly unzipped the smallest pocket of her faded blue backpack. From inside, She carefully removed a bright blue friendship bracelet made of inexpensive plastic beads. It looked completely ordinary except for a tiny folded piece of paper tucked securely beneath one of the woven threads. Naomi held it tightly, but did not unfold it. "Because someone dropped this," she whispered. "And I don't think they knew I could read what was inside." William's eyes remained fixed on the tiny bracelet as the judge raised the gavel. Across the silent courtroom, polished wood gleamed beneath the morning sun, and for one suspended heartbeat, it seemed as though every breath, every heartbeat, and every secret inside that room waited together for what would happen next. The wooden gavel remained suspended above the bench for only another heartbeat before William Harrington rose from his seat. The movement was calm, almost effortless, yet it drew every eye inside the courtroom toward him. The quiet rustle of expensive suits, legal pads, and camera straps faded into complete silence. Judge Harold Whitaker lowered his gaze toward the man standing near the front row, surprise briefly crossing his face before his practiced expression returned. "Your Honor," William said respectfully, his voice steady and measured, "I request a brief pause before the verdict is entered into the record." A ripple of whispers spread across the gallery. Reporters exchanged puzzled looks. Several attorneys recognized William immediately, while others simply wondered why one of the country's most respected philanthropists had interrupted a routine civil proceeding. Judge Whitaker adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Harrington, with all due respect, you are not counsel in this matter." "That is correct," William answered. "I am not asking to argue the case. I am asking for 60 seconds before a decision becomes permanent." The judge glanced toward Victor Langley, whose expression remained polite, although the corners of his smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Victor rose slowly from his chair. "Your Honor, my client has waited months for closure. Delaying this proceeding because of speculation would be highly inappropriate." William did not look at him. His attention remained fixed on the bench. Justice has survived longer than 60 seconds before. The courtroom became still once again. Naomi Brooks stood quietly beside William, clutching the small blue bracelet in both hands. She felt dozens of strangers looking at her, yet she kept her eyes on the judge. Across the room, Grace Brooks looked from her daughter to William with growing confusion. She had never met the billionaire before that morning, and she could not understand why he had suddenly placed himself between the court and the verdict. Judge Whitaker folded his hands together. "On what basis are you requesting this delay?" William looked down at Naomi. She nodded almost invisibly before placing the bracelet into his open palm. The colorful plastic beads reflected the sunlight streaming through the courtroom windows. It looked like something any elementary school child might wear during recess. William carefully unfolded the tiny piece of paper hidden beneath the woven thread. Several handwritten numbers appeared beside a room number and a date from 2 days earlier. Nothing more. No names. No explanation. Only numbers written in hurried blue ink. Victor Langley laughed softly. "Surely we are not interrupting court over a child's bracelet." A few uncertain chuckles echoed through the gallery before disappearing just as quickly. William calmly folded the note again. "Perhaps not because of the bracelet," he replied, "but possibly because of where it came from." Naomi finally spoke. Her voice remained quiet enough that people leaned forward to hear every word. "I was looking for my mom after school. I thought she might still be talking to her lawyer." She swallowed once before continuing. "I was outside conference room 12 when 2 men came out. One of them dropped the bracelet because it got caught on his briefcase." Victor crossed his arms. "Children imagine many things." Naomi looked directly at him. "I did not imagine you picking it up and saying somebody would notice it was missing." The courtroom fell silent again. Victor blinked once before forcing another smile. "That is quite a story." "It is not a story," Naomi answered. "You said the room number out loud when you looked for it." William studied Victor's face without saying a word. During decades of negotiations, he had learned that people often revealed more through silence than conversation. Victor remained composed, but he no longer looked toward Naomi. Instead, he kept glancing at the folded paper in William's hand. That detail alone caught William's attention. Judge Whitaker cleared his throat. "This line of discussion is becoming increasingly speculative." William nodded respectfully. "Then allow speculation to become verification." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed his phone. "My office maintains independent investigators for fraud involving charitable grants. They are less than 5 minutes from this courthouse. I would simply like them to verify whether conference room 12 was occupied at the time written on this note and whether security footage still exists. Victor's confidence wavered for the first time. This is unnecessary. William finally turned toward him. If it is unnecessary, then it will only take a few minutes to prove. Grace watched her daughter with tears gathering quietly in her eyes, not from fear, but from astonishment. Naomi had promised her the previous evening that everything would be all right. Grace had assumed those were simply the hopeful words of a child trying to comfort her mother. Now she realized Naomi had been carrying something much larger than hope. The judge rested both hands on the bench. The court cannot delay indefinitely. William inclined his head. I am asking for 1 hour, not indefinitely. Before anyone could answer, Evelyn Carter, the senior courtroom clerk, stepped quietly toward the bench carrying a thin folder that had just been delivered by another employee. She whispered something into Judge Whitaker's ear. For the first time that morning, the judge's confident expression cracked ever so slightly. His eyes shifted toward the conference hallway outside the courtroom doors, then back toward William. Naomi noticed the movement immediately. She did not smile. She simply tightened her grip on the empty bracelet string and whispered almost too softly for anyone except William to hear. He knows what they are going to find. The courtroom doors remained closed as a quiet wave of uncertainty settled over everyone inside. No one reached for a phone. No one stood to leave. It was as though the room itself had decided to hold its breath. Judge Harold Whitaker rested both hands on the bench, saying nothing while Evelyn Carter placed the newly delivered folder beside him. She did not speak again, but William Harrington noticed that she avoided looking directly at the judge. Years of experience had taught him that silence often carried more meaning than conversation. Naomi Brooks stood beside him without moving. The faded blue backpack still hung from her shoulder, and the empty friendship bracelet rested loosely in her small hand. She stared toward the hallway outside the courtroom, listening carefully. She remembered every detail from 2 afternoons earlier. She had waited outside conference room 12 after school because her mother had asked her to stay near the security desk until the meeting ended. Instead, she had watched 2 men step into the hallway speaking quietly. She had not recognized one of them, but she remembered the other immediately because his expensive watch reflected sunlight across the polished floor. As they hurried away, something blue caught on the corner of a leather briefcase before falling unnoticed beside the wall. Naomi had picked it up only because she thought someone might come back looking for it. When she turned the bracelet over in her hands, she discovered the folded note hidden beneath the woven thread. She had not understood the numbers at first, but she recognized the words Conference Room 12 written across the top. Before she could call out, the men had disappeared around the corner. Since that afternoon, she had carried the bracelet everywhere, hoping someone would explain why a simple piece of plastic seemed important enough to hide a message inside it. Victor Langley broke the silence with a polite smile that no longer reached his eyes. Your Honor, this proceeding is drifting far from the actual facts of the case. We are discussing assumptions made by a child who happened to find a bracelet. William answered before the judge could respond. Sometimes facts begin exactly that way. Someone notices something everyone else ignores. Victor folded his hands neatly on the counsel table. Children can misunderstand ordinary conversations. Naomi looked directly at him. Then why did you look scared when Mr. Harrington opened the note? Several people in the gallery quietly exchanged glances. Victor answered immediately, but his voice sounded tighter than before. I was not scared. Naomi nodded gently. Maybe worried is a better word. William almost smiled. The child never raised her voice. She never accused anyone with anger. She simply observed what she had seen. That difference mattered. Across the courtroom, Grace Brooks watched her daughter with quiet amazement. Naomi had always noticed little things that others overlooked. She remembered birthdays after hearing them only once. She recognized neighbors by the sound of their footsteps. She could describe entire conversations days after they happened. Grace had often called it her daughter's gift. Today that gift had become something much larger. The courtroom clock ticked softly above the rear doors. Every passing second seemed louder than the last. Finally, Evelyn Carter stepped forward once more. Your Honor, she said carefully. Building security has confirmed that Conference Room 12 was reserved at the date and time written on the note. Another wave of whispers spread through the spectators. Judge Whitaker cleared his throat. That proves only that a meeting occurred. Evelyn nodded respectfully. There is something else. She hesitated before opening the folder. The hallway security recording from that afternoon was requested for deletion yesterday morning. Complete silence followed her words. William slowly turned toward Victor Langley. The attorney remained perfectly still, yet the confident rhythm of his breathing had changed. His fingers tapped once against the polished tabletop before becoming motionless again. William had spent 30 years studying people whose fortunes depended on hiding the truth. Tiny changes often revealed far more than dramatic reactions. Judge Whitaker leaned forward. Who requested the deletion? Evelyn lowered her eyes to the document. The request form does not include a completed authorization signature. Reporters immediately reached for their notebooks. One photographer quietly adjusted the focus on his camera, but no flash interrupted the solemn atmosphere. Naomi looked at William. I told you somebody did not want people to see what happened. William slowly nodded. You did. He looked toward the bench once again. Your Honor, I respectfully renew my request that the court delay the verdict until the missing recording can be recovered. Modern security systems usually maintain backup archives even after deletion requests. Evelyn looked up with quiet surprise. That is correct, she said. The courthouse stores duplicate copies for disaster recovery. Victor spoke quickly. Recovering archived files could take days. Evelyn answered before anyone else could. Not necessarily. If the archive has not been overwritten, information technology staff can retrieve it within the hour. Naomi's eyes quietly filled with hope, but she remained perfectly composed. She reached into her backpack once more and carefully removed a folded sheet of notebook paper. There is one more thing, she said softly. William accepted it and unfolded the page. It contained a child's careful pencil drawing of the hallway outside conference room 12. Every door, every bench, every window had been sketched with remarkable attention to detail. Near one corner, she had drawn a tall man holding a briefcase beside another man standing partly hidden by the doorway. Above them, she had written only 4 simple words in neat block letters. They did not see me. The drawing seemed too simple at first, only pencil lines on notebook paper, the kind of careful sketch a child might make during a quiet afternoon in class. Yet as William Harrington studied it, the courtroom around him appeared to narrow until every detail on the page became sharper than the faces watching from the gallery. Naomi had drawn the courthouse hallway with a precision that unsettled him. The long bench near the window, the brass number beside conference room 12, the narrow strip of glass in the door, even the water fountain across from the clerk station, all of it matched the corridor outside. Then his eyes settled on the 2 figures she had drawn near the doorway. One was marked with a gold watch. The other stood partly turned away, but the shape of the robe sleeve was impossible to miss. William did not speak immediately. He simply folded the paper once and looked up at Judge Whitaker. The judge had gone very still. Victor Langley shifted in his seat before rising again, slower this time. Your Honor, with respect, this is becoming theatrical. A child's drawing is not evidence. Naomi did not look embarrassed. She did not shrink under the attorney's tone. She held the empty bracelet string between her fingers and said, I drew it so I would not forget. The words settled softly across the courtroom, and for a moment no one answered. Grace Brooks pressed one hand over her mouth at the defense table, her eyes shining as she looked at her daughter. William turned toward Victor. Did you meet anyone outside conference room 12 2 days ago? Victor smiled as if the question amused him. I meet many people in courthouses, Mr. Harrington. That was not my question. The silence sharpened. Victor's smile faded by a fraction. I have no obligation to answer questions from you. William nodded once. Then perhaps you will answer them from the court. Judge Whitaker's jaw tightened. Mr. Harrington, you are walking dangerously close to interfering with court procedure. William faced the bench with calm respect, but his voice carried through the room. With unmistakable firmness. Your Honor, court procedure exists to protect justice, not to hurry past a warning from a child who may have witnessed misconduct. A low murmur rose from the gallery before the bailiff called for order. Naomi glanced at William, and he gave her a small nod that told her she was not alone. That tiny gesture steadied her more than any speech could have. She took one step forward, still keeping both hands at her sides. I heard Mr. Langley say the word verdict, she said. Then I heard another man say it was already handled. Victor let out a controlled breath. Handled could mean anything. Naomi turned toward him. Then he said my mom would not walk out. The courtroom became so quiet that the buzz of the fluorescent lights seemed suddenly loud. Victor looked toward the judge for help, but Judge Whitaker was no longer meeting his eyes. Evelyn Carter stood beside the clerk desk, her face carefully composed, yet her fingers rested protectively on the folder containing the security request. William noticed that too. Miss Carter, he said gently, is there any record showing who accessed conference room 12 that afternoon? Evelyn looked to the judge, waiting for permission. Judge Whitaker hesitated long enough for several people to notice. Finally, he said, answer the question. Evelyn opened the folder again. The reservation was made under the name of Victor Langley. A ripple passed through the courtroom. Victor raised both hands slightly, as though calming an unreasonable crowd. I used that room for legal preparation. There is nothing unusual about that. William's eyes did not leave him. Was anyone with you? Victor straightened his tie. I do not recall. Naomi looked down at her drawing, then back up. You were with him. She did not point at the judge. She did not need to. Everyone understood. Judge Whitaker's face hardened. Young lady, you must be very careful with your words. William stepped slightly closer to Naomi, not blocking her, only making it clear that she was protected. She is being careful, he said. That is why everyone is listening. The judge drew in a slow breath, then looked toward the bailiff. This court will recess briefly while administrative matters are reviewed. Victor responded too quickly. Your Honor, I object to further delay. Noted, the judge said sharply. The sudden edge in his voice betrayed more than anger. It sounded like fear trying to disguise itself as authority. As people began whispering again, Evelyn crossed the room and handed William a smaller slip of paper. Information technology is already checking the archive, she said quietly. But there may be another problem. William unfolded the slip. One sentence had been written in blue ink. The backup file was accessed 20 minutes ago. William looked up, and for the first time that morning, the full shape of the trap became visible. Someone inside the courthouse had realized the recording could still exist, and someone was trying to reach it before the truth did. Naomi saw the change in his expression and whispered, "They are not just hiding what happened." William looked toward the closed courtroom doors, where footsteps echoed faintly from the hallway beyond. "No," he said softly. "They are still trying to hide it." The recess did not feel like a recess. It felt like the courtroom had been placed under glass, sealed away from the rest of the city, while the truth moved somewhere just beyond reach. People stood, whispered, checked their phones, and looked toward the closed doors with nervous curiosity. But William Harrington did not move from Naomi Brooks's side. He had seen powerful rooms turn cold before, boardrooms where fortunes shifted with a signature, charity galas where smiles hid negotiations, private offices where men spoke carefully because every word had a price. Yet this courtroom felt different. The stakes were not measured in stock value or market share. They were measured in whether a mother would walk out beside her daughter or disappear into a mistake that someone had tried to dress up as justice. Naomi looked smaller now that everyone was standing around her, but she did not seem weaker. Her faded blue ribbons rested against her braids, and the empty bracelet string curled in her palm like a tiny piece of evidence that refused to be forgotten. William crouched slightly beside her. "Naomi, I need you to think carefully," he said. "Did you see anyone else near the hallway after those men left?" Naomi stared down at her shoes for a moment. They were plain black sneakers, a little scuffed at the toes. "There was a woman with a cleaning cart," she said. She was pretending not to listen, but she looked scared. William nodded slowly. "Do you remember anything about her?" Naomi closed her eyes, searching through the memory as if walking back into the courthouse hallway. She had silver hair under a red scarf. Her name tag said Mrs. Alvarez. She kept looking at the ceiling camera. William glanced toward Evelyn Carter, who had remained near the clerk desk. "Do you know her?" Evelyn's face changed with recognition. "Marisol Alvarez. She works evening maintenance. She has been here for 15 years. Before William could respond, Victor Langley stepped closer, his polished shoes making soft sounds against the floor. "This is getting irresponsible," he said, keeping his voice low but sharp. "You are encouraging a child to build a conspiracy out of random observations." William straightened slowly. "I am encouraging adults to verify what a child noticed." Victor's eyes narrowed. "You may have money, Mr. Harrington, but money does not make you the court." William held his gaze. No, but it does give me the resources to ask questions some people hoped would never be asked. The words landed quietly, but Victor understood them. So did Judge Whitaker, who stood near the bench speaking in a hushed tone with a court officer, his face turned away from the room. Naomi watched Victor carefully. You keep saying I am making things up, she said. But you never ask what I heard. Victor looked down at her, and for the first time his expression lost its polished ease. Because what you think you heard is not relevant. Naomi tilted her head. Then why are you afraid of it? A few people nearby fell silent. Victor stepped back as if the question itself had crossed a line. William placed a reassuring hand lightly against the back of Naomi's chair, not touching her, only making it clear he was there. Evelyn returned carrying another folder, thinner than the first. Information technology found the backup, she whispered to William. But the file is locked behind an administrative access request. Someone attempted to open it under Judge Whitaker's credentials 20 minutes ago. William absorbed that without reacting outwardly. Can they see whether the file was changed? Not yet, Evelyn said. But they can make a copy if the chief clerk authorizes it. Where is the chief clerk? Evelyn glanced toward the hallway. Third floor records office. William looked at Naomi. Stay close to your mother. Naomi shook her head gently. No. Grace, who had quietly approached under the supervision of her attorney, spoke for the first time. Baby, listen to Mr. Harrington. Naomi turned toward her mother, and the strength in her face softened. Mom, I know what I saw. If I stay quiet now, they win. Grace's eyes filled, but her voice remained calm. You have already been brave enough. Naomi looked back at William. I can show you where Mrs. Alvarez was standing. William hesitated. He would not place a child into chaos. He would not let this become a spectacle. But Naomi was not asking to run into danger or perform for a crowd. She was asking to point out a hallway in a courthouse filled with officers, clerks, cameras, and witnesses. William turned to Grace. She stays between us. We go only to the hallway. If anything feels wrong, we return immediately. Grace searched his face, then nodded once. I am coming too. The four of them moved toward the courtroom doors. William, Naomi, Grace, and Evelyn. Behind them, Victor called out, Your Honor, this is improper. Judge Whitaker turned, but too late. The doors opened with a heavy wooden sigh, and the hallway beyond stretched bright and polished beneath fluorescent lights. Naomi stopped just outside conference room 12. She pointed not to the door, but to the window across from it, where afternoon sunlight would have reflected like a mirror. I was here, she said softly. Mrs. Alvarez was there, and the man with the gold watch was standing where everybody could see him, except he forgot the glass could see him too. William followed her, gazed to the narrow window beside the water fountain. In its dark reflection, he could almost imagine the hidden meeting replaying itself. Then, from the stairwell at the far end of the hallway, came the soft squeak of wheels. A cleaning cart appeared, pushed by an older woman with silver hair tucked beneath a red scarf. Naomi whispered, That is her. Marisol Alvarez slowed her cleaning cart the instant she recognized Naomi Brooks. The older woman had kind eyes that usually carried the calm patience of someone who had spent years quietly working while others hurried past without noticing her. Today those eyes filled with surprise, followed almost immediately by concern. She looked from Naomi to Grace Brooks, then to William Harrington, and finally toward the courtroom doors that remained partially open behind them. Miss Alvarez? William asked gently. My name is William Harrington. May we speak with you for a moment? Marisol tightened her grip on the handle of the cart before offering a cautious nod. If this is about the hallway 2 days ago, she said softly. I wondered when someone would ask. Naomi looked up at William without saying a word. She had been right. William kept his voice calm. We are only interested in the truth. Marisol glanced down the hallway to make certain no one else was approaching. I have worked in this courthouse for 15 years, she began. People think the cleaning staff only notices dust and fingerprints. They forget we are here before everyone arrives and after everyone leaves. We notice almost everything. Grace listened quietly beside her daughter while Evelyn Carter stepped closer, carrying the folder against her chest. Did you see anyone outside conference room 12 that afternoon? Evelyn asked. Marisol nodded slowly. I saw 2 men leave the room. One wore an expensive gold watch that reflected the sunlight every time he moved his arm. The other kept looking toward the ceiling camera instead of the hallway. William exchanged a quick glance with Naomi. Every detail matched her memory. Did you recognize either man? William asked. Marisol hesitated. One of them was Mr. Langley. I have seen him here many times. She paused before lowering her voice. The other man was wearing a dark overcoat over his robe. I could not see his face clearly because he turned away when he noticed me. Naomi gently tugged on William's sleeve. That is why I only drew the robe. William nodded almost imperceptibly. Marisol reached into the side pocket of her cleaning cart and removed a small notebook with worn blue covers. I write things down, she explained. Not because it is my job. It helps me remember maintenance requests. She opened to a page dated 2 days earlier. Besides several supply notes was a short handwritten sentence. Conference room 12 hallway closed for 15 minutes by request of legal staff. William studied the page carefully. Who requested that? Marisol pointed to a small set of initials. I was told they belonged to administrative security. But later I checked the maintenance schedule, and there was never supposed to be any hallway closure. Evelyn's expression changed immediately. Administrative security does not use those initials anymore. That code was retired last year. Marisol looked surprised. Then someone used an old authorization. William felt another piece of the puzzle slide into place. Whoever arranged the meeting had known courthouse procedures well enough to borrow an outdated clearance code that few employees would question. That was not luck. It was planning. Before anyone spoke again, footsteps echoed from the far end of the corridor. Victor Langley appeared beside the elevator, walking with measured confidence, though his smile seemed noticeably thinner than before. He stopped several yards away. Interesting conversation, he said pleasantly. Maintenance employees now determine legal outcomes. Marisol lowered her notebook but did not step back. No, sir, she answered respectfully. I only remember what I saw. Victor gave a quiet laugh. Memory is not always reliable. Naomi answered before anyone else could. That is why she wrote it down. Victor's smile disappeared. William folded his hands calmly. Miss Alvarez kept notes before anyone knew this courtroom would become the center of attention. That makes them considerably more valuable. Victor looked toward Evelyn. Surely these personal notes are not official court records. Evelyn remained composed. No, but they may help establish a timeline. Victor seemed ready to respond when another courthouse employee hurried toward them carrying a tablet computer. He stopped beside Evelyn, slightly out of breath. The Information Technology Department recovered the archive copy, he said. It was not deleted. William noticed Victor's shoulders stiffen. Can it be viewed? Evelyn asked. The employee nodded. Yes, but there is something unusual. The recording from the hallway begins normally, then pauses for exactly 43 seconds before continuing again. William frowned. A system error? The employee shook his head. According to the software log, it was not an error. Someone manually marked those 43 seconds for restricted access. Silence settled over the hallway. Even the distant sounds of elevators and office phones seemed to fade. Naomi looked toward the security camera mounted above conference room 12. It did not stop watching, she whispered. Someone just tried to stop everyone else from watching. William slowly smiled for the first time that day, not because the mystery had ended, but because the truth was becoming harder to hide. Can the missing 43 seconds be restored? The employee nodded again. The original file still exists on the secure backup server. Only the public copy was altered. William let out a quiet breath. Across the hallway, Victor Langley turned slightly toward the elevators as though considering whether to leave. Naomi noticed before anyone else. He knows, she whispered. William followed Victor with his eyes, but made no move to stop him. No, William said calmly. He knows the truth is still there. And now he knows we are about to see it. The atmosphere inside the courthouse shifted the moment the information technology employee disappeared into the records office. Hope had entered the building, and with it came tension that no one could ignore. William Harrington looked down the long hallway where polished marble reflected the overhead lights like still water. Somewhere, behind those secured doors, a digital archive held 43 missing seconds that could change everything. He had spent a lifetime watching people react when the truth moved closer. Honest people usually became calmer. Those with something to hide almost always became impatient. Victor Langley proved the pattern without realizing it. He checked his watch twice within a single minute. then glanced toward the elevator before forcing another practice smile. "Surely everyone understands," he said, addressing the small group gathered outside conference room 12, "that technical delays happen every day. We cannot simply assume the existence of wrongdoing because of a missing video segment." William folded his hands calmly. "No one is assuming anything. We are waiting for evidence." Victor nodded as though agreeing. "Exactly. Which is why the courtroom should resume immediately instead of allowing rumors to grow." Naomi Brooks quietly stepped beside her mother. Grace rested one gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder, grateful simply to stand close to her again. Naomi looked toward Victor with the same steady expression she had carried all morning. "You keep asking everyone to hurry," she said softly. "Why?" Victor looked down at her. "Because justice should not be delayed." Naomi answered without hesitation. "Real justice is never afraid to wait for the truth." Marisol Alvarez lowered her eyes, hiding a faint smile. Even Evelyn Carter seemed surprised by the child's quiet wisdom. Before Victor could respond, two courthouse deputies approached from the records office. Their expressions remained professional, but their pace was noticeably faster than before. One of them handed Evelyn a sealed envelope. "The chief clerk requested this be delivered immediately," he said. Evelyn thanked him, carefully opened the envelope, and read the single page inside. William watched her expression change from curiosity to concern. "What is it?" he asked. Evelyn looked up slowly. "Someone submitted an anonymous complaint against Naomi less than 10 minutes ago." Grace's face immediately tightened. "Against my daughter?" Evelyn nodded. "The complaint claims she entered a restricted hallway without permission and fabricated a story to influence the court." Naomi blinked, but did not look frightened. She simply looked confused. "But I was waiting where my mom told me to wait." William accepted the paper and read it carefully. There was no signature, no supporting statement, and no witness identified. Only broad accusations written in formal language. He folded the page once before handing it back. Interesting timing. Victor spread his hands. "Anyone can submit a complaint." William looked directly at him. "Exactly." Naomi tugged lightly on William's sleeve. "They want everyone to stop listening to me." William nodded. "Yes, because attacking the message is easier than explaining the facts." Grace knelt beside her daughter. "Naomi, look at me." Naomi did. "Have you told the truth today?" "Yes, Mom." "Have you changed your story even once?" "No, Mom." Grace smiled through moist eyes. "Then you keep telling the truth. The rest belongs to the grown-ups." William quietly admired the strength of the woman standing beside him. Grace had every reason to feel overwhelmed, yet she chose to strengthen her daughter instead of frightening her. It reminded him that courage often ran through families long before anyone else noticed. A courthouse employee hurried toward Evelyn once again, carrying a portable laptop connected to an encrypted storage drive. "The archive team recovered the original recording," he announced. Every conversation in the hallway stopped instantly. Victor's shoulders became visibly rigid. "Can it be viewed?" William asked. "Not yet," the employee replied. "The file is intact, but the system requires authorization from the chief administrative judge because it contains restricted courthouse footage." Victor exhaled almost imperceptibly, as though relieved by one more obstacle. Naomi noticed. He smiled, she whispered. William answered quietly. "Only for a second." Evelyn closed the laptop carefully. "The chief administrative judge is in a judicial conference across the street. She is already on her way back." Another silence settled over the hallway, different from the earlier ones. This time it carried expectation instead of uncertainty. William looked through the courthouse window toward the city beyond. Afternoon sunlight reflected from neighboring buildings, filling the corridor with warm light despite the tension surrounding them. He turned back toward Naomi. "You have done something remarkable today." Naomi shook her head gently. "I only said what I heard." William smiled. "Most people hear many things. Very few choose to speak when it matters." At that exact moment, the elevator doors opened again. An older woman in a black judicial robe stepped into the hallway accompanied by two court administrators. Everyone recognized her immediately. Chief Administrative Judge Eleanor Prescott had returned. She accepted the encrypted drive from the information technology employee, looked once around the silent hallway, then said in a calm voice that carried to every corner, "No verdict will be entered until every second of this recording has been reviewed." Chief Administrative Judge Eleanor Prescott carried the encrypted drive into a secure review room adjacent to the courtroom, accompanied by two technology specialists, Evelyn Carter and the courthouse records supervisor. The heavy door closed quietly behind them, leaving everyone else waiting in complete silence. William Harrington remained beside Naomi Brooks and Grace Brooks near the courtroom entrance. No one tried to predict what the recording would reveal anymore. The truth had finally reached the point where it no longer depended on guesses. It depended only on whether the original recording had survived untouched. Naomi looked up at William. "Do you think it is still there?" she asked softly. William smiled gently. "People can hide a file. They cannot change what already happened." Grace slipped her fingers around Naomi's hand. "No matter what happens next, I am proud of you." Naomi leaned lightly against her mother for only a moment before standing straight again. "I was scared," she admitted. Grace brushed a loose ribbon away from her daughter's face. "Being brave does not mean you never feel scared. It means you tell the truth anyway." Several reporters remained outside the courtroom, speaking only in whispers now. The excitement that had filled the hallway earlier had changed into something quieter and more respectful. Even those who had doubted Naomi at first had begun watching her differently. She was no longer simply a little girl standing in the middle of an important legal case. She had become the reason everyone was still searching for the truth instead of accepting the easiest answer. Across the hallway, Victor Langley stood alone near one of the courthouse windows. His confident posture had slowly disappeared during the past hour. He checked his phone repeatedly, only to place it back into his pocket each time. William noticed another detail. Victor was no longer looking toward Naomi. Instead, he kept watching the closed review room door. A man only waits for one door when he knows what is behind it. Nearly 20 minutes passed before the secured door finally opened. Judge Prescott stepped into the hallway carrying the encrypted drive in one hand and a printed incident report in the other. The hallway immediately became silent. She looked first toward Judge Harold Whitaker, who had quietly returned from his chambers several minutes earlier. "Judge Whitaker," she said calmly, "please join me inside the courtroom." Her tone contained neither anger nor accusation. It contained authority. Everyone followed. The spectators returned to their seats. Reporters reopened their notebooks. The attorneys took their places once again. William sat beside Naomi while Grace returned to the defense table. The atmosphere felt completely different from the beginning of the morning. Earlier, everyone had been waiting for a verdict. Now everyone was waiting for the truth. Judge Prescott remained standing instead of taking the bench. "The archived security recording has been examined," she announced. "The original file remains intact." A quiet wave of relief crossed several faces. Victor Langley remained expressionless, but the color had noticeably faded from his face. Judge Prescott continued. "The missing 43 seconds were not lost because of equipment failure." She paused long enough for every word to settle across the room. "They were intentionally hidden from the public copy through an unauthorized administrative restriction." A murmur swept through the courtroom before fading again. Judge Whitaker lowered his eyes without speaking. Judge Prescott looked toward the technology supervisor. "Please summarize what appears in the restored recording." The supervisor stood and opened a folder. The hallway camera records Mr. Victor Langley entering conference room 12 at 2:14 in the afternoon. Approximately 4 minutes later, Judge Harold Whitaker enters the same room. Both remain inside for 12 minutes. Nobody moved. The supervisor continued reading. When they exit the room, Mr. Langley carries a leather briefcase. Judge Whitaker is holding a sealed brown envelope that was not visible when he entered. Naomi quietly looked toward William. He gave her a small, reassuring nod. The supervisor turned another page. As the two men separate, an object falls from the briefcase. The object is later recovered by a juvenile identified as Naomi Brooks. The recording clearly shows the child picking up the blue friendship bracelet before placing it inside her backpack. The room fell completely silent. Naomi had not imagined anything. She had remembered every detail exactly as it happened. Judge Prescott looked toward Victor Langley. "Do you dispute the authenticity of this recording?" Victor opened his mouth, then closed it again before answering quietly. "No." She turned toward Judge Whitaker. "Do you dispute it?" The judge remained motionless for several seconds before slowly replying, "No." William watched Naomi instead of either man. The little girl did not celebrate. She did not smile. She simply looked relieved, as though a weight far too large for someone her age had finally been lifted from her shoulders. Judge Prescott closed the incident report. The restored recording raises serious questions regarding the integrity of these proceedings. Effective immediately, today's verdict is suspended pending a full judicial ethics investigation. Grace lowered her head as tears quietly filled her eyes. Across the courtroom, William looked at Naomi and said softly, "Your voice carried farther than anyone realized." Naomi glanced toward her mother, then back toward the courtroom where every adult who had once doubted her now sat in complete silence, listening to the truth that had begun with nothing more than the quiet courage of a child who refused to ignore what she had seen. The silence that followed Judge Eleanor Prescott's announcement carried a different weight than any silence that had come before it. It was no longer filled with uncertainty. It was filled with understanding. The courtroom that had begun the morning expecting a routine verdict now stood as a reminder that justice could still change direction when even one honest voice refused to remain quiet. Judge Harold Whitaker slowly removed his reading glasses and placed them on the bench before him. His shoulders seemed heavier than they had only an hour earlier. Victor Langley remained standing beside the counsel table, no longer offering explanations, no longer attempting to redirect attention. The restored recording had answered the questions that words no longer could. Judge Prescott addressed the courtroom once more. The proceedings involving Grace Brooks are hereby suspended pending independent review. A new judge will be assigned, and this matter will be reheard under full judicial oversight. Grace closed her eyes for a brief moment before looking toward her daughter. Relief washed across her face, not because every problem had disappeared, but because hope had returned. She would finally have the opportunity to be heard in a courtroom where every fact could be examined fairly. Naomi Brooks smiled for the first time that day. It was not a triumphant smile. It was the quiet smile of a child who had carried a burden much larger than herself and had finally been allowed to set it down. William Harrington watched the little girl with genuine admiration. During his years in business, he had met executives who spoke confidently before thousands of people, yet very few possessed the courage Naomi had shown with nothing more than honesty and conviction. He walked toward Grace as court officers began organizing the next administrative steps. "Mrs. Brooks," he said warmly, "I believe your daughter reminded every person in this room why the law exists." Grace looked at Naomi before answering. "She reminds me every day." Naomi looked up at William. "I thought nobody would believe me." William smiled gently. "Sometimes the truth arrives quietly. That does not make it any less powerful." Marisol Alvarez approached them carrying the little blue friendship bracelet that had been temporarily retained during the review. She knelt carefully so she could return it directly to Naomi. "I think this belongs with you," she said. Naomi accepted it with both hands, turning it over slowly before slipping it around her wrist once again. The inexpensive plastic beads no longer looked ordinary. They had become a reminder that even the smallest object could matter when it carried the truth. Evelyn Carter joined them a moment later holding a neatly folded copy of Naomi's pencil drawing. "The chief administrative judge asked that this be returned as well," she said. "She believes it should stay with the person who made it." Naomi unfolded the paper carefully. The hallway, the window, the bench, the figures near conference room 12. Every line looked exactly as she remembered drawing it. William looked at the sketch and quietly said, "One day people may forget the headlines from today. They will not forget the courage behind them." Several reporters who had spent the afternoon observing respectfully lowered their cameras instead of crowding around the family. Somehow they understood that this moment belonged to Naomi and Grace, not to tomorrow's newspapers. Judge Prescott stepped down from the bench and approached the small group herself. "Naomi," she said kindly, "our justice system depends upon people who choose honesty over convenience. Today you reminded every adult in this building of that responsibility." Naomi lowered her eyes politely. "My mom always says that the truth should never stay lonely." Grace placed her arm around her daughter, surprised to hear her own words spoken back with such simple sincerity. Judge Prescott smiled. "Your mother taught you well." As people slowly began leaving the courtroom, afternoon sunlight poured through the tall windows, illuminating the polished wooden floor where only hours earlier everyone had expected a very different ending. William walked beside Naomi and Grace toward the courthouse entrance. Outside, The city continued exactly as it had before, traffic moving steadily through downtown streets, people hurrying to offices and restaurants, unaware that inside one courtroom a little girl had changed the course of an entire case with nothing more than honesty. Before they reached the front steps, Naomi stopped and looked back through the open courthouse doors one final time. William noticed her expression. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. Naomi looked at the courtroom one last time before answering softly. "I was only one person." William shook his head with a gentle smile. "No, Naomi. Today you were the voice that everyone else finally learned to hear." Naomi slipped her small hand into her mother's as they walked together into the warm afternoon light. The blue bracelet rested quietly around her wrist, catching the sunlight for just a moment before disappearing beneath the sleeve of her sweater, carrying with it a simple lesson that would remain long after the courtroom had emptied. That justice is strongest when ordinary people choose to protect the truth, and sometimes the bravest voice in the room belongs to the smallest person standing inside it.